Okay, every lecture I'll try to do a little outline on the board of kind of where I'm going. So now we're going to go to point 2, which is sort of what is microeconomics? Okay, so you know, how many of you guys took economics in high school or something like that? Okay, so a lot of you. So you guys know the basics. How many of you read free economics? Okay, good, excellent. You know sort of the basic, you know the basics, but let me just sort of review the basics of what is microeconomics. Microeconomics, so what is micro? Microeconomics is really the study of scarcity. Microeconomics is the study of scarcity. It's basically how individuals and firms make themselves as well off as possible in a world of scarcity. And scarcity is key because really microeconomics is about something that should be near and dear to the heart of this engineering school. It's about constrained optimization. Microeconomics is about constrained optimization. It's about how individuals and firms assess the trade-offs they face in making themselves as well off as possible, subject to the constraints that they have in terms of their resources. That is, economics is all about trade-offs. Okay, it's all about how can I get the most of my resources, given the limits those resources play on me. Now, this is why economics is called, in popular parlance, the dismal science. Because we're always negative. We're always about the trade-offs. We're always about, well, yeah, you want that, but you can't have that. Have you thought about this, et cetera? Okay? So that's what we're called dismal science. Okay? So basically, the role of economists in society is to recognize those trade-offs. Now, but at MIT, we understand that's not dismal. That's fun. Because we are an institution devoted to constrained optimization. I mean, is there a better example of that than the 2007 contest, where you're given pieces and have to build a robot with a limited set of pieces that does something? That's constrained optimization. So I want you to think about microeconomics as just like engineering, but where instead of building robots, we're running people's lives. Okay? So instead of doing something boring like building a robot that moves ping pong balls, we're doing something interesting, which is telling you why you do the things you do, and why other people do the things you do, and how you can make the most money, and how other people try to make money off you. Okay? All within the same framework of constrained optimization. Now, and this is why modern microeconomics, the field I will teach and the field you will learn at any university in America, was invented here, maybe not in this room, maybe it was in 10250, but in one of these rooms by Paul Samuelson, who invented the modern microeconomics course here at MIT in the 1950s. He's really the most important economist of the 20th century, taught here and developed the modern microeconomic approach that we'll talk about today, and it's an MIT-based approach, so it should hopefully appeal to you. Now, what we're going to do in this course is we're going to be building a series of models. We're going to be modeling individual and firm behavior. Now, technically, as you know, a model is any description of the relationship between two or more economic variables. But the difference from your other courses, and I'm telling you right now, it's going to be frustrating, I'm warning you in advance, is unlike the relationship between energy and mass, there is no law, okay, that tells you exactly how things relate. We're going to build a series of models that is going to help us try to understand the way things relate, but this is not a real science. Okay, as much as we wish we were, we are not. Okay, we're not a real science. We are a quasi-science, okay, social science. What we're trying to do with our models is make assumptions that negotiate the tension between, on the one hand, explaining real-world phenomena, and on the other hand, being mathematically tractable, okay? And that tension is going to reveal itself throughout the semester. Typically, it'll reveal itself on the one hand in the fact that some of the math will get hard. But more generally, what it's going to reveal itself, because the math won't be too hard for you guys, more generally it's going to reveal itself is in a lot of shortcuts we're going to take. We're going to make a lot of assumptions. You're going to say, why are you assuming that? And it's going to turn out that with assumptions that typically aren't that strange, we can explain a huge variety of phenomena. So what I'm going to ask you to do is bear with me on two fronts. One is bear with me while I make some assumptions, and understand those assumptions aren't necessarily doing that much violence to reality, but add a lot of power to our modeling. And bear with me when I explain that even with that, my models are simplified, so I can't explain everything. Okay? They're simplified, so they're not a precise mathematical description of the real world. Now, we're going to focus in our modeling on two groups, consumers and producers. Okay? We're going to spend the first third of the course talking about consumers, that's you all, now. We're going to spend the second third of the course talking about producers, that's firms, that's the folks selling to you all, the folks you'll eventually work for or own, which is producers. Okay? Now, in both sides, they're trying to do the same thing. They're trying to make themselves as well off as possible, subject to the constraints. So for consumers, what they're trying to do is to maximize their utility. We are going to have a mathematical representation of happiness. You no longer have to worry about defining happiness anymore. We're going to tell you what it is. We're going to mathematically write it down for you. A mathematical representation of happiness called utility. And consumers are trying to maximize this utility subject to a budget constraint. That's the constraint maximization or trade-off. They want to make themselves as well off as possible subject to the resources that they have, which we call a budget constraint. Okay? Firms are going to maximize their measure of happiness, which we call profits. Okay? Firms are going to maximize profits subject to the constraints placed on them by the marketplace in which they have to sell. Okay? So they're going to maximize profits subject to both the demand of consumers and the cost of inputs. So when we model producer theory, it's going to be harder than modeling consumer theory. Consumers are somewhat easier to model. It's just sort of, I make myself as happy as possible subject to what I have. Firms maximize their profits, but they have to care about both the whims of consumers and the cost of their inputs. So producer theory is a little bit more complicated than consumer theory.